Hello, monsters and magical girls. My name is TB Skyn, and sure, let's talk about some Star Guardians. Why not? We will get to Nico and Zoe and Zaya and Rakan in time, but we're going to start with a little bit of Star Guardian history, because this is Star Guardian Lux, the very first Star Guardian, and to the best of my knowledge, she was never supposed to be a skin line. Like, hey, we have a popular girl champion who can do magic. What if we make her a magical girl skin? So they found her a Sailor Moon cosplay and slapped some anime aesthetics on top of it, and that was Star Guardian Lux. And it is still one of Lux's very best skins, by the way. I dig the aesthetic. I really love this splash art in particular. It's got really lovely dynamics to it. But that was it was supposed to be a one and done kind of thing. But then, well, it made a lot of money. It got really quite indeed extremely popular, and Riot was like, okay, there's clearly a demand for this kind of content, for this kind of skin in the community. We should service that demand. Players have been asking about it. We should do more of it. And also, wow, that sure was a lot of money. We would like some more of that. Which leads us on to the full first lineup of Star Guardians with Lulu, Poppy, Janna, and Jinx introduced to the lineup to sort of round up a full classic children's TV hero team, kind of your Power Rangers, your Super Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, color-coded magical power team. And it's brilliant. Like, it's one of the best skin lines I think that Riot has ever done, especially this particular release is immaculately put together in a lot of ways, but you can also see an aesthetic shift happening. It's less obvious in the individual splash arts for the characters, but you can really see the aesthetic shift happening from what Star Guardian Lux was, which was the basic League of Legends aesthetic at the time, with some anime girl paraphernalia and aesthetic kind of spread on top of it, but still ultimately based on League aesthetic too. Once they knew that they had to create a whole universe around this, once they knew they had to create a whole skin line around it, they went, okay, let's establish a coherent aesthetic for the League of Legends Star Guardian universe, and they went with the obvious inspiration, which is Sailor Moon, 90s magical girl anime, Cardcaptor Sakura, the rest of them. I'm not a magical girl anime expert, sadly. With a little bit of hints of Madoka Magica in the little pet character for Lulu especially, which, whew, dark stuff to bring in there. But like, taking a grab bag of aesthetic hints and tricks from various popular magical girl and iconic magical girl anime, and pouring that into creating a team. And this original Star Guardian lineup is some of the best character design that League of Legends has ever done in its skin lines, because you have Lux, who very obviously was never meant to be the centerpiece of any universe's aesthetic, because like she's wearing a what I would call a magical girl costume rather than a magical girl character design, right? You have this costume which has a bunch of tropes that are associated with magical girls kind of slapped onto it in an homage to the fullness of the genre, but not a character design that's really designed to be, oh, this is a reflection of who this person is within a fictional sub-universe where we have created a whole new backstory and a new life for her in the same way. So they managed to make that work still, because what they do with Lux in the Star Guardian universe is that she's the protagonist. Like, she's the straight woman, she's the center character, the leader of the team, and therefore, in a lot of ways, also the most boring personality. So it's kind of fine that she looks like a somewhat semi-generic magical girl, because that's kind of the role that she's supposed to play in the team. That's a really clever little character design sleight of hand. But the real brilliance is what they do to differentiate the other members of the team outside of just color coding them. Like, that's always been one of the weaknesses of the Power Rangers, is just they just have different colors. There really isn't a lot of differentiation in their character design, which is also part of the point of the lineup, of course, but what Riot does here is really some quite clever stuff. You can see there's more visual affinity between the four Guardians over here on the right, Lux, Janna, Lulu, and Poppy, where they all wear the skirt. They all have sort of the same flowy aesthetic thing going on with a lot of what they got. But Jinx is the only one who doesn't wear the skirt, who doesn't have that skirt aesthetic going on. She's got a much more tomboyish aesthetic with, you know, the hot pants and the jacket that she's got hanging down, which visually signifies that she's a little bit apart from the rest of them because she's the rival character. She's the outsider. She's the angry one who likes blowing stuff up and explosions and who doesn't want to play by the rules and who's got a little bit of darkness in her, which gives her a great contrast because she's got so much personality to Lux's, standard anime protagonist level of personality, which is not very much. Then you've got Janna, who's the mature one, the mom, the big sister of the team, as it were, who has a secret dark history and knows a little bit more, perhaps, than she should about what it's like to be a Star Guardian, and is kind of concealing those dark truths from the others in order to protect them. So she's got that sort of taller, more slender aesthetic, but also an outfit that signals a little bit more of maturity in her. Poppy, who's the no-nonsense warrior character who just wants to fight the monsters, do the thing. Well, she's got armor instead of a sailor suit on. Brilliant little bit of differentiation. And Lulu, who's the silly, but also perhaps most emotionally competent of all of them, who's most emotionally in touch, has got this, sort of slightly girlish, but also very appropriate little flowy dress thing going on that's less specific than the rest of them to kind of indicate that she's a little bit of an airhead. Like, there's a whole bunch of good stuff where you meaningfully differentiate the characters from each other while also creating a lot of visual coherence and affinity between them that holds them together as a team. All very well and good. So they have a great basis to tell a whole bunch of interesting and funny little parody, magical girl stories set in a League of Legends-ish universe where they fight monsters and they go to high school and they have school drama and fall in love with boys. No, we don't get any of that, though, because Riot, I will maintain to this day, have dramatically dropped the ball on Star Guardian content. They could have done so much. They could have done, online animated shorts. They could have done a comic. They could have done anything with the Star Guardians, and they kind of just didn't. So we get this wonderful basis for a team dynamic. We get the animated shorts that go along with the animated short that goes along with the release, which is brilliant. But then it's quiet, silence, absolutely nothing else until the release of the next line of Star Guardians. And this is where the aesthetic begins to strain a little bit under its own weight, because you've already established this perfect sequence of Star Guardian characters, this immaculate almost team that serves really well as a core around which to build a story. And then you add these guys, and it's a little bit, it's this, but again, it's more of just that, but on some different characters that aren't really related to the central character in the Star Guardian universe. Like, this is always going to be, for me, the limitation of the Star Guardian universe, and indeed a limitation that a lot of magical girl storytelling and a lot of shonen storytelling comes up against, is that they are all always based on and centered in some regard around their protagonist. Which means the question we have to ask is, okay, so how do these guys relate to Lux? They can't be part of the team, because then you have 10 on one team, and that's perhaps, a touch too many in order to have a group dynamic thing going on. So they are a rival Star Guardian team. And there's a bunch of clever things going on here that I really like in terms of character design. Specifically, that you've got the pink one, the red one, the purple one, the green one, and the blue one, same as you've got the pink one, the red one, the purple one, the green one, and the blue one on the other team. So you've got this mirror aspect thing going on where each character on the rival team has a mirror in the primary team. That's a clever observation, and then they go with a further observation where the other Star Guardian team are more mature. They're more grown up. They've got more experience, they've been through more stuff, and they've got more secrets. Okay, that sort of works. So you've got Ari, who's sort of the mature, sort of arrogant princess version of Lux-ish, and you've got Ezreal, who's like, what if Poppy, but more irresponsible, and you've got Syndra, who is Janna, but goth? Darker, I guess? And Soraka, who's Lulu, but I guess kind of sad and insecure instead of being all happy and dopey. And Misfortune, who's Jinx, but without the rebellious streak. Where you can see the idea of creating the rival team who sort of present a kind of mirroring of the primary team, which is interesting, but where the primary team has a really solid inter-character dynamic. Like, the characters have clear relationships to each other, and there's a clear dynamic between them. These characters don't, like, what's their internal dynamic really? Because they are all designed, I think, in relationship to the main team, where the main team is designed in relationship to each other. These guys are not coherent with one another. Like, they don't look like a team to the same extent that these guys do. And that's sort of where this particular set of Star Guardian skins kind of get some negative marks from me. I want to stress, I don't think any of them are bad. Well, maybe Ezreal a little bit. They're all fine, but that sort of narrative aesthetic coherence that I liked so much about the original line is kind of getting diluted and watered down because they're just doing more Star Guardian uniforms, but without being informed by character relationships in the same way, and that to me is a little bit of a pity. And then there's Ezreal, who's just like, I don't care what anyone says, this right here doesn't look like the male version of that. This doesn't look like the male version of that uniform. Like, no. He looks like he's from the same anime, but he does not look like he's on the same team. He doesn't look like he's a Star Guardian. He looks like he's a pretty anime boy he's a shonen protagonist who wandered in from another anime then is hanging out for a while. He doesn't really look like a Star Guardian at all to me. And that's Ezreal is sort of the black sheep of... I can see the idea. Like, I can see that they go, oh, damn, we can't just have yet another girl in a miniskirt and a sailor uniform. We have to do something different, so let's do Ezreal, who's our go-to anime boy. And it's just like, yeah, I can see what you were trying to do, but oh my god, he's just so boring. Like, he's just wearing, like, a suit. He's got a jacket and a vest and pants. I don't know. Like, it's just boring and not very interesting, and it doesn't look like a Star Guardian. So you've got the aesthetic of the Star Guardian universe is sort of starting to creak a little bit. It certainly can't support any more good guy Star Guardians, because, like, this is already too much. So we can't add more of that. So what do we do next? Well, let's give them some villains to fight. And that's a really, really good idea, because that's what the Star Guardian universe has been missing for a long time, is some villains for the goddamn Star Guardians to fight. Which is kind of important, because the whole thing about them is that they're guardians. So what are they guarding from? Which we sort of got a hint at in the limited time PvE event, where, oh, they're fighting the Void. Okay, yeah, Void monster, that makes sense. But where are the villains? Where are the bad guys for them to fight? Which is where Saya, Rakan, and Zoe come in. And then also Nico, for some reason. We'll get to her later. And that's conceptual. The idea is really, really good. But again, we run up against the problem that we started with all the way back here. Star Guardians is based on Star Guardian Lux. She's the progenitor, she's the primary one, she's the main character of this particular anime, if it was an anime. She's the protagonist whose story is central to our understanding of the Star Guardian universe, which is why the rival Star Guardian team's leader is all about being a kind of slightly darker mirror to Lux, like a slightly darker, more mature version of her, for her to play up against as a character dynamic. But then we get to Saya and Rakan, and okay, how do they relate to Lux? How do they relate to the core team of Star Guardians? What's the thematic relationship between these guys and these guys? And indeed, what's the thematic relationship between these guys and those guys? There's a lore connection with Ari and I think Janna into Saya and Rakan, in that Saya and Rakan used to be on Ari's Star Guardian team until they were destroyed and then resurrected by Zoe, blah, blah, blah. There's a lore connection, but what's the thematic connection? Because one of the things that you get in a lot of just children's anime in general, shonen anime, and magical girl anime, I don't know why I forgot that all of a sudden, is that the villains tend to represent simple concepts, simple themes, simple parts of the everyday life, and relatable parts of the everyday life of the presumed reader, in the same way that I'm thinking of something like villains in Sailor Moon, for example, it would be very common that the villain would be, for example, like a perfume and jewelry salesperson who's taking advantage of women's desire to feel beautiful in order to infect them with evil brain disease that makes them turn into monsters or something like that. Like, that would be a classic Sailor Moon villain where you can see, okay, they are a representation of a social pressure to conform to a beauty ideal that can be really kind of miserable and oppressive, and it feels good to be able to fight back against that with like this story about how you can take that stuff on and you can fight it. So what are Saya and Rakan as villains relative to Lux? Like what's the challenge in Lux's life that these guys embody, and in overcoming them, she symbolically overcomes the yada yada. Like that classic trope, because the entire Star Guardian universe is trope based. It's based on tropes, it's based on classic magical girl storytelling ideas. So where do they fit in? What are they? And that's where it gets a little tricky, because that means we also have to ask, well, what's the main theme of the Star Guardian universe? What's it about? What's the central conflict? What's the central conflict for Lux? What's the thing she has to overcome? What is the enemy that she has to fight? And looking at Zoe, who's apparently one of the most powerful enemies in the whole universe, who seems to be sort of supposed to be a major antagonist, the villain is Chaos? I guess Chaos? That's what it says in Zoe's skin bio anyway, is that she wants chaos, and so she does evil chaos things. But how? So then Lux stands for order. Okay, because that to me feels like new information. Because my sense of the Star Guardian universe, like the thing that Riot have been hinting at very, very strongly, is that the central conflict, like the central threat in the Star Guardian universe, like the really core thematic threat, is burning out. Like that's something that's been hinted in both in the music and in some of the storylines, and especially with Janna and with Ari, that Star Guardians may have a dark fate ahead of them, which is sort of a Madoka Magica kind of thing where they burn very bright for a time, but then they burn out, and then they kind of fall. And that's sort of that has some thematic resonance where, like, you must enjoy the fruit of your young life. Like you must live your youth to its fullest, because you will burn out and you might, end up living a life where you can't really be as alive and vibrant as you once were. Like, yeah, there's stuff about growing up, about, the fear of getting older, about the fear of growing out of a life of childhood into a life of adulthood. There's a lot of good stuff there. But how does that relate to chaos, and how does that make Lux a stand-in for order? Why is order the thing she has to fight for in order to overcome that challenge? And here the main problem really is that we don't have a bunch of Star Guardian media. There haven't been a bunch of stories told in the Star Guardian universe that can illuminate the thematic relationships for us. Which is why I think these evil Star Guardians fall kind of flat for me, because they're supposed to be Star Guardians who died and were resurrected as evil Star Guardians, right? They're supposed to be Dark Guardians or something along those lines. But the problem is they don't look like that a lot. They don't look like Star Guardians at all. And they don't look like dark versions of Star Guardians either. At least not to me. Like, Saya comes the closest because she's got the miniskirt going on. But Rakan runs into the Ezreal problem, where he doesn't look like the male version of that, and Rakan doesn't really look like the male version of that either. And it's a little... I want to stress, these skins are not bad. They look fantastic. I love the colors on them. I love the color coordination. I really love the effects on Saya's cape and Rakan's cape. Especially, like, they're really, really good. I love a lot of the detail on Zoe. Like, there's just a whole bunch of fun stuff going on here, but it doesn't look like it relates to the Star Guardian universe for me. It doesn't look like it relates to either the central aesthetic of the Star Guardian universe, which is this sort of semi-90s anime aesthetic, anime magical girl aesthetic, where these guys look way not that. really. Like, they look overcomplicated for the form. Like, in terms of how many of the shape language of the characters, they look very overcomplicated visually for being villains in a genre that's traditionally relatively simplistic. In its designs, they look a little overcomplicated. The thing that works for them a lot is that they are gaudy, and they are flamboyant, and they are, like, very colorful, and they've got a lot of stuff going on. That's classic magical girl villain ideas, where you have, like, all these markings and all these extravagant details and these big outfits that really do way too much, and there's way too much stuff going on. That's classic for magical girl villains, but they don't look like they belong in the same aesthetic universe as this, or even this, really. They look like villains from another property, is the thing. And that's a bit of a pity. Like, I really like the idea of using Zaya and Rakan, who are champions that have, like, that have animal characteristics in them, as being just a little bit monstrous, right? Like, being a little bit inhuman as villains in the universe. Sure, I can see that working, but the specific execution, they don't look like Star Guardians at all. Like, and they don't look like dark versions of Star Guardians either, because they don't look like that classic magical girl aesthetic. Zoe comes a lot closer because she at least has got the mini skirt thing going on, and sort of the sailor uniform looking outfit with the thigh highs and the, you know, the heels, and still, yeah, I mean, she looks like she could be a credible villain in a magical girl anime, but I don't know how she relates to Lux. I don't know how she relates to the core team. I don't know how she relates to the thematics of the Star Guardian universe. I just don't see a strong connection there. And because I don't see a strong connection, I don't see a strong aesthetic connection either. They don't really look like they belong in the same aesthetic universe. And that's the main problem. And that's also kind of the problem that Nico has. Because I look at Nico and it's like, I mean, yeah, she's got the sailor uniform and stuff, but she doesn't really look like an anime character to me. Like, that's the big thing for me with Nico, is she doesn't really look like an anime character to me. She looks like a cartoon character. She looks like a cartoon character out of a Western cartoon. Much more. She looks like something out of Steven Universe, honestly, more than she looks specifically like an anime character. And that's kind of a problem, because the whole aesthetic, when they created the Star Guardian universe, the whole aesthetic was centered around that. The anime aesthetic, especially that sort of late 90s anime aesthetic, was the thing that was supposed to be the centerpiece of it. And that maybe got upgraded to a 2000s anime aesthetic because they started doing them in 3D. Out of necessity, but Nico just kind of, she again looks more like she's cosplaying a Star Guardian than she looks like she is one. And that's sort of my main problem with the whole new line of Star Guardians, is that it's sort of, yeah, I guess they could, but they don't look like they belong in that universe. They don't look like they belong in that aesthetic conception. And that's a very personal opinion. I recognize that. But where I had a very strong sense of identity for the Star Guardians with the first full lineup, a really strong sense of identity and a strong sense of the kinds of stories and ideas that these characters could be used to explore, that got a little bit more muddy with the introduction of the rival team. But it was, okay, fine, the rival team, okay, there's some dark secrets in the Star Guardians, I guess they can be the ones who explore that. Sure, I can see it. But then it's like, who are these villains? What are they standing in for? What dark force in Lux's life are they standing in for? And the answer to that seems to be, oh, they are what happens when a Star Guardian burns out. So they represent death? Or if burning out metaphorically represents the transition into adulthood, they represent adult? Like, what are they? I don't see it, and that's my main problem with them. Anyway, to finish up, the Nico splash art is fine. Like, and people made a fuss about it. I don't really see it. Like, the eyes are maybe a little too far apart. But the whole thing about this being low quality, no, it's fine. It's not the best splash art in the game, but it's fine. I don't think it's anything that's worth getting worked up about. Anyway, before we hit the outro, I'm going to bring the mood down a little bit. Usually at the end of my videos, I talk about like a Patreon, blah, 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 donation, yada, yada. Not going to do that this time. This is my friend Robert Ivansky. DeClaude, you may know him as. He's one of the people who started the Trinity Force podcast, who was on that for a very long time, and who still, I think, guests on it every once in a while. And if you're in the League of Legends community, you might know him. He suffers from primary progressive multiple sclerosis, which is really just an absolute garbage, awful disease that nobody should have, but he's got it. And it's taking away his mobility and, you know, his ability to do a lot of things physically. And one thing he can't do is drive, which means he relies a lot on his wife if he needs to go anywhere. And it means he can't, well, he can't do stuff for his family, like pick his daughter up from school or take her to activities and stuff like that. So he has started a GoFundMe, which I've already donated to be able to put hand controls in his car so that he can be a dad to his family the way that, you know, dads are supposed to be, pick kids up when they need to go somewhere. So if you were thinking of supporting me or subscribing to my Patreon or giving me a donation or something, I would like you to go over there, there's a link in the description, and kick that money his way. Because right now he needs it a lot more than I do. So yeah. Anyway, if you've enjoyed the video, like, comment, subscribe, do the dislike button thing if you want to, and I shall see you in the next video.